Hey, Redcasters, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Go Big Red. Welcome to the Forum, the show where we learn more about Husker Nation one fan at a time by asking the same four questions. I'm your host, Honky, and our guest tonight is an Omaha native, but today he calls the Lone Star State home. That's never dampened his support or love of dear old Nebraska U, though, and you'll find him at least once every year at a Husker game, home or away. And I know within 5 minutes of when I met him the first time that I wanted to welcome to the Forum. Welcome to the Forum, Jerome Prince.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be with you and excited to talk Nebraska football.
I am as well. This is a tradition for us on the off season to do the forums, and this is our kickoff show of this off season for the forum. It's great to have you on. It's also February, and in Nebraska, it's cold right now. We've really hit winter. I'm not going to complain because it's not been a bad winter up to this point, but it's gotten cold. How is it down there in Dallas right now?
Feels like Nebraska. We literally have a cold front moving in as we speak. Temperatures are dropping down into the teens tonight, and by tomorrow morning, wind chill will be -1. And so very reminiscent of Nebraska. Feels just like home.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to coming out to Dallas next week, and that's something I always like to tell our Redcasters, our forumers that are watching, how I've met the person that I'm talking with. And over the number, I don't know what I'm at now, 40 fan forum shows I think I've done. I've met people through social media or other Husker podcasts. We've had people on. I've had former Huskers, Adam Carricker, Rob Zaska, Cody Glenn, who coaches football down there in the Houston area, friends, family. You're the first person I met, full disclosure, through my work. I work at the University of Nebraska Foundation, and I get to meet amazing people on the job. And we were down in Dallas. I think it was back in October. You and I were eating at Hutchins Barbecue, having a great lunch there. And I'm telling you, what was it, 5 minutes? We were sitting down talking, and before you know it, I mean, I was like, I've got to get you on this show. I mean, it was just, I love that about Husker fans and Husker Nation. Is like when you start talking to somebody, you get the energy going and the vibe going. That's what I've had with you. It's been a lot of fun getting to know you.
Likewise, and I'll tell you, similarly for me, met you for the first time. We got to talking, and it was like we had already known each other. Like it was just a very fluid conversation because we had the one commonality with Nebraska football. And I would say something, and your ability to recollect anything Nebraska was just so impressive. Really made for an easy conversation.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that. Sometimes I interject too much of my thoughts, but you know what? That's what I love about the forum. It's a one-on-one chance we're here where we get to talk about the history, your history with Husker football and your fandom. And there's no better way to do that than get started with the question one here. And Jerome Prince, why are you a Husker fan?
Why am I a Husker fan? So that's a question I've asked myself many times over the years because there's not one particular memory that I have that I can anchor myself on as being the catalyst for being a Husker fan. But there are two things that, as I think back upon it, really set the stage for me becoming the big time Husker fan that I am. I think the most, material one that I can think of was my grandmother. And so back in the day growing up, my grandmother would watch me on Saturdays. My father worked for the post office, so he was off to work. And I spent time with him on the weekends. And so my grandmother would watch me while my dad was at work. And as far back as I can remember, and this is, I was born in the late 70s. So as far back as I can remember, get you to the, early to mid 80s, every Saturday we were listening to a Nebraska game on the radio, more times than not at that time. And on the occasion when they were televised, my grandmother and I were watching the game, and I mean religiously. And I can't tell you where my grandmother's love for Nebraska football came from, because most of the members of our family that were into sports played basketball. But I think it's one of those things, and fellow Nebraskans can appreciate this, but when you live in a state that has no other Division I program from a football perspective, no professional sports for football or basketball, you very quickly, become Nebraska fans, and you cheer for everything Nebraska. So those Saturdays with my grandmother around that kitchen table were very formidable in me becoming a Nebraska fan. And then you kind of pair that with what transpired with me in elementary school. I went to Edison Elementary in Omaha, and one of my friends at the time, he was a big OU fan. And so he and I would get to talking, and the Nebraska OU rivalry, of course, was a big topic of discussion. And everyone's talking and wanting bragging rights. And of course, at that time, mid '80s, I think we lost 2 or 3 games in a row to OU. So I'm hearing it back and forth from that guy all the time. And win or lose, it was just a lot of fun to have those conversations throughout the entire year. And you have that one game throughout the year that gives you bragging rights for the whole year. And of course, you want to come out on the right side of that. But even if you don't, it makes for great conversations to build friendships around. And those two things, the time with my grandmother, the time with my friend at Edison, where we were talking, Nebraska OU, very formidable in me becoming a Nebraska fan. And then I would say, of course, when it was time for me to go to college, there was no other place I was looking to attend. Eventually went on to attend the University of Nebraska, and that just cemented my fandom for Nebraska for life.
What's so great about talking with other fans is you get the connections, like so many similarities. You grew up in Omaha. I grew up in Columbus. I'd go to my grandma's house. I'd go to my grandma's house on Saturday mornings. I remember the newspaper, the Omaha World Herald, would have cartoons of that weekend's game. It would be Nebraska against Missouri, and it would be a Herbie Husker, and there'd be a cartoon tiger, and there'd be some little saying, and then their prediction, their score of it. My grandma would cut those out and keep a scrapbook of all the games. And of course, as you walked in the front door, there's the poster for that team. Frozen in my mind. The very first year I ever remember Husker football, and I was born in 1977, I'll always remember 1983, the scoring explosion. And I remember opening up Grandma and Grandpa's door, and to the right is the poster, and it's Mike Rozier, Irving Fryer, Turner Gill running out of the scoreboard. And then I can remember writing down the ridiculous basketball type scores that we were putting up that year: 84-13 against Minnesota, and 63-7 against Syracuse, and all the just crazy Tecmo Bowl kind of numbers. And but it's so much fun. Like those are the memories I have. I remember the 42-10 win that year against UCLA, listening to it on the radio at grandma's, and we were down 10-0 and not being worried. And all of a sudden we just go off 42 points and we blow them out. And anyways, so much of when I'm hearing you talk there, and when I hear the other people that have been on the show, when people talk about what gets them started, it's that generation thing. It started with mom or dad or grandpa or grandma, and then it works their way down. And now it's our job, it's our responsibility to as adults to try to promote it down to our next generations too. I think that's part of our role now.
Well, I'm certainly doing my part. My son has never lived in Nebraska. He attends TCU, but he's a big Red football fan, and he attends some of the games with me as well. So this past year, had a lot of fun with him. He actually went along with me to the Colorado game, and we had a tremendous time there. And so he is a big time Nebraska Cornhusker football fan, even though he attends TCU University.
That was one game I did not make it to last year. What was the environment like in the stadium for Colorado? I know what it looked like on TV.
It's interesting because after they did the tunnel walk, my son turned to me and he said, "This is different." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I go to TCU football games all the time. It looks, feels nothing like this. It was absolutely electric." And if it happens to you once, it happens to you many times, where the hairs on your arms kind of stand up as the team's kind of walking out, and just seeing the team feel the energy of the crowd, get off to the great start that they did that game. It was tremendous. And what I'm looking forward to is getting back to the days. I remember when I was a student there, between 96 and 2000, we had some really, really good teams. Obviously, we won the championship in 97. And I just remember the home field advantage we had. And it's one of those things where, if the team's doing well, the atmosphere and the crowd can take it to another level. But certainly there are times where if we're struggling a little bit, it can get a little quiet at Memorial Stadium at times, right? And I'm waiting for the time where we're back to being really, really good, and the stadium truly creates that home field advantage consistently and takes it to another level. We have a tremendous home field advantage as it is, but there's another level there. I mean, the one game I remember as a student, and I don't recall exactly which year it was, but Washington came to town. And I think it was a matchup between two top 10 teams at the time. And if I remember correctly, we won something in the neighborhood of 56-10 or something to that effect.
Yep.
And it was an unbelievable atmosphere. And I will tell you, like, what I experienced last year in the Colorado game was probably the closest to what I felt there, just because the anticipation around the team was really, really high. Obviously, we had an okay year last year, but I think everyone is expecting more out of the team going forward. And I know the fans of Memorial Stadium are ready for that to happen, and I'm excited and looking forward to being a part of it.
1998, Solich's first year, beat Washington there. I remember the game the year before that too, the 97 one at Washington, and that was with Brock Heward, and we had Peter and Wistrom going down there, and that was against two top 5 teams as well. That's the thing, we talk. I think sometimes, especially younger fans, we might romanticize Husker football. Like, we just got to get back to the 90s when we just always won, and there was never any losses or anything. And we were talking a little bit before we went live, and there was a adversity back then. We lost 7 straight bowl games prior to beating Miami in the Orange Bowl there. I had Mike Babcock on the show one time. He's the Husker historian, longtime writer with the Journal Star. And, he talked about how Coach Osborne, a lot of people say it was like 25 years of just straight up trajectory. He's like, no, it wasn't. We didn't throw enough, against teams. We couldn't beat Oklahoma. We couldn't, win the big games. We lost all those bowl games. There's always something. But he kept, we stuck with it. We stuck with it, and we didn't try, fire the whole staff and all those things that when sometimes fans would call for it after a big loss. And the last 5 years of Coach Osborne, when you and I were going to school there, and the direct aftermath of that dynasty, that was just an unbelievably special time. But Husker fans and Coach Osborne, we earned it. I mean, it took 20 years to get to that point. And once we got there, man, that was a great time.
It really was. And I think it says a lot about when you go on the run that we did from, I would even say it started early 90s. I know we had those couple of close calls against Florida State before we went on to win it, 94, 95, 97. But when you go on that type of run, it does make you forget some of the tough challenges you had up until that point. But when I think back, that entire journey was fantastic, because there's just a lot about what the culture of the team and the organization and how that correlated to what it means to be a Nebraskan that really related to me. Like, in Nebraska, things aren't always easy in Nebraska. People go through challenges. They have to work hard. And more than anything, you have to have that mental toughness to keep on going when things aren't going well, and to see your football team exhibit those same characteristics meant something, right? And then that just made it even more joyous, or joyful, I should say, when they finally got over that hump. The level of excitement was just absolutely tremendous. But the reason you feel that kind of joy is because of the pain and disappointment you felt leading up to that.
Great way of saying it. Well, how about we get to question 2 here? What is your favorite Husker fan memory?
Great timing for that question. And for me, it's that Orange Bowl, January 1st, 1995, when we finally got over that hump. I mean, I remember you talked about, the 7 bowl game losing streak we had, 6 of those 7 to Miami or Florida State, 3 in a row at the Orange Bowl. I remember all of those games vividly. And to see our coaching staff evaluate why we fell short in each of those games and make the necessary strategic and personnel adjustments to help us get over the hump. That's what this thing is all about. Like, one of the things that we hear forever and a day is, we don't have, a real robust recruiting ground for Division I athletes in Nebraska. Yet somehow we've always found a way to be very successful. And I think, one of the reasons for that is having the right people in the right place at the right time. And so when you have the right coach, when you have the right athletic director, when you have the right senior level leadership at the university, those people are making the strategic decisions that guides the direction of of the program. And you may not win it every single year, but if you have the right people in those seats, eventually you'll get there. And so for me, that game was just a testament to that coming to fruition. And then to see the run that we went on thereafter, it was like once we beat Miami in '94, we had the confidence that anytime we got into a challenging situation, we were going to figure it out, right? And so it's just, you got to get over that hump that one time. And once you accomplish it that first time, there's just something inside of you that says, you know what, if I've done this once, I can do it again. And we just had a lot of players, a lot of coaches, a lot of support staff that really believed that and helped this program get to some tremendous heights. And I know for me, at that time, I never thought, what the next 20 years will look like. But one of the reasons why I'm able to be a committed fan is because I know once we get that proper alignment, and I believe we do have it today, good times are on the horizon. So I'm looking forward to the type of success we'll have going forward. But our history and the journey that it took for us to get to that, January 1st, 1995 game for the 94 season was just a tremendous ride. And I think about a lot of the players on those teams and what they exemplified for the team. Like, you didn't really hear about individual play. You heard about team play. And that was something that really resonated with me as well. And so just to see that team, overcome all of that, trail in that game and find a way in the fourth quarter to pull it out was just a tremendous memory that I have, and something I will never forget.
Yeah, that game, I mean, of all the favorites, I have a lot of favorite games, but that one, it's hard to be. It was such a microcosm of everything that's Nebraska football. It was Nebraska versus Miami, and that was always they were the bad guys, we were the good guys, right? But the good guys that couldn't win the big game. And incredibly talented team there, Warren Sapp and Ray Lewis and all that, and they're talkative. And I remember Coach Osborne's halftime speech about put your hands down and don't get in fights with these guys. You can't hurt somebody with helmets on. Don't be running your mouth. Don't be a banny rooster. The first time I've ever heard that term. But hey, but we've trained hard, and if we do things right, we're going to be the best team in the fourth quarter. And that was kind of that mentality. I think about this even today in today's college football world and the SEC and the playoff and how all this stuff works. Some of it's rooted in my background of, like, I got so tired of having to play Miami in Miami, Florida State in Miami, for bowl games, to win championships. And yeah, we didn't, to your point, we didn't win them. We lost 7 in a row, but it was always like, hey, but we're also playing pretty good teams, right? And back then, one of the teams I always thought they used to be good back in the 70s, a little bit earlier, but Missouri was. And then all of a sudden we went on like a 20-season streak where we beat them. I was like, well, why is that? Why did we keep having that success? And Missouri would lose their best in-state kids to Nebraska most years.
Yep.
They also were going through coaching staff after coaching staff. They couldn't stick with anything. And when I think of Nebraska over the last 25 years now, it's just about as long since Osborne coached as he coached here. But since then, we've gone through what? Solich to Callahan to Pelini to Riley to Frost to now Rule. We've gone through 6 different coaching staffs during a time period where we had one. And to your point about leadership, when Osborne was here, he had Devaney for the first 20 years of it as his athletic director. There were people that wanted Osborne fired after 4 or 5 years in because we couldn't beat Oklahoma. Imagine how disastrous that would have been to the, and in 1968, there was a petition in Omaha to fire Devaney because we went 6-4 2 years in a row. Imagine how disastrous that would have been. Like, I think of that every time when, right now with Coach Rule, if we lose a game, something bad happens and you go on social media and people are like, fire this guy and fire that guy. And, sometimes I'm like, this is why we got to take a step back and, evaluate things, calm heads. And if changes need to be made, make them. In the early 90s there, we switched to that 4-3 defense. That was a smart move that was looking at the film of what are we doing well, what aren't we doing well, where are we getting beat. The 4-3 was holding up against the run against Oklahoma and Colorado and those teams. So, and it will help us against the pass. Like, there was just a beauty of how Coach Osborne did it. And I'll say one other thing with that. Even when they made that switch, we're going to talk a little bit later, question 4, about next season. And we've got some changes at coordinators and all that. But one of the things that always impressed me was we made a change to the 4-3 defense And nobody in 1992 said, well, we got to fire Charlie McBride. We've got to get a 4-3 defensive coordinator. We can't, it was just good coaches are good coaches. If he can coach the 5-2, he'll coach us into the 4-3. And he did a great job doing that. And so I just, that was a great time. It was just a great time.
It was a great time. And I think it just exemplifies that leadership matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think more than anything, looking back, not only was Coach Osborne a great coach, he was a great leader. And I know for me, there was just nothing more calming on a Saturday, no matter where we were in the game, to see Coach Osborne on the sideline, flat bill hat and all, and play call, which at that time you didn't see many head coaches calling plays, right? Like, he was the play caller, and he was masterful at being a play caller. And so it was just really, really calming to see, like, no matter how high the stakes were, his heartbeat was at 64. He was cool, calm, and collected, and he just provided great leadership. And that's something that I really respect about Coach Osborne. And honestly, I see a lot of the same characteristics in Coach Rule, and it's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about our future.
Love it. All right, well, let's get to question 3 then. And who are some of your all-time favorite Huskers?
All-time favorite Huskers. We might need another show to go through the entire list, but there's a number of them. And what I would say is, I had to give that a lot of thought. And I really started thinking about, like, what are some of the characteristics that really resonate with me? And so, thinking about players that had a tremendous amount of mental toughness, that held themselves to a high standard, from an accountability perspective, were disciplined, knew their assignments, knew where they were supposed to be, when they were supposed to be, and elevated, other players in their preparation and their play, right? So those were like the 4 things that I was trying to think through. And there's a few players that just really resonated with me. And of course, we had a lot of players offensively that made a lot of great plays that you could start this list off with. But for me, it's one of the reasons why, you can't be wearing a black T-shirt underneath my shirts to these days in honor of the black shirts. I'm a defense first type guy. And so Mike Minter was one of my all-time favorite players at strong safety. Just to see him, go through a little bit of adversity early in his career with the ACL tear, to come back and just being an outstanding player. And if I remember correctly, I think he was on 2 of those national championship teams, if I remember correctly.
94, 95.
94, 95, right? And so had an absolutely tremendous career. But, and then I think about someone like a Baron Miles, undersized cornerback. And we've had a number of undersized cornerbacks throughout the course of Nebraska football, but he's the only one that I can recollect that no one really talked about his size, because he played so much bigger than his physical attributes. And he would be able to cover receivers that had a 6 or 7, 8 height advantage. And you just would not notice that much throughout games because of his ability to jump and time his jumps and things of that nature. And his ability to play tight man coverage was just tremendous. And he was small in stature, but I remember him mixing it up and run defense as well. And so someone like a Baron Miles really stands out. And then if you kind of compare or contrast that with like a Michael Booker, who was one of our bigger cornerbacks, 6'1", 6'2" type corner. But, if you put Mike on a particular wide receiver, it was pretty much a wrap that particular day. And so just having those type of players that you can count on, that you can rely on, allowed us to play some really, really strong defense. But of course, you can't have a list like this without, putting a few offensive players on the list. And when you think about the run that Nebraska went on, obviously it always starts with Tommy Frazier. And it's interesting when I think back about Tommy, obviously he had, some limitations as a passer, but he did enough. Tremendous runner, but when you really think back, he wasn't the fastest guy on the field, but he had unbelievable balance, unbelievable desire, and unbelievable leadership. And I think more than anything, it was his leadership that allowed him to step in midway through his freshman year to take over the starting reins from Mike Grant and never look back. And that leadership, you talk about elevating other players in their preparation and their play. That's what Tommy did at an early age. And everyone on that team just started to take it to the next level. So I really tip my hat to Tommy, because he was very instrumental in getting that whole thing rolling. And then, one of my all-time favorites, hometown kid, Amon Green, Knew Amon when he played, Little League football for the Omaha Bears. Went to school with him at North, watched him at Central. Of course, watched him at Nebraska, and then to see him go on to the league and have the type of success that he did was another just all-time great for me. And then the last one I would say, living in the state of Texas now, I've been here nearly 20 years. When I first moved here, one of the players that I first started watching play high school ball here was Rex Burkhead. And so I'll never forget my neighbor at the time, pulling me to some local high school Texas football games and getting me indoctrinated in the big thing of high school football here. And it is on another level. I didn't want to believe it, but it is true. I mean, we have, $50 to $75 million stadiums down here just for high school football. These stadiums are holding, 10 to 15,000 fans on any given Friday night. And watching Rex play at Plano Senior High was absolutely tremendous. He was obviously one of the best players on the field every time he stepped on the field. And that's saying something here in Texas. With the quality of ball we play here, when you see someone stand out the way Rex did, when you knew he was getting the ball and there was nothing the defense can do to stop him, he was just a tremendous player. And I was really surprised to see Nebraska, pluck him out of the state of Texas, given all of the local schools we have here. But those are, a handful of the all-time greats from my perspective, and had a lot of fun. There's many others, but those six really resonate with me.
I think some of what you just said ties so nicely to our previous conversation. You focus on some of the cornerbacks and Michael Booker and Baron Miles, obviously Tyrone Williams back then, John Reese. These guys, when we switched to the 4-3, if we were gonna make the 4-3 work, it had to start at the corner position and work its way out. The corners had to, if we could play one-on-one with those guys against those Miamis and the teams that we were playing in the bowl games, if we could do that, then the guys who couldn't make it at corner, they moved back and became our safeties. And the guys that were playing safeties moved up into the linebacker spots like Ernie Beeler and Ed Stewart. And then some of those outside linebackers like Dante Jones and Dwayne Harris and Trevor Alberts could move into defensive end spots. And then a Bruce Moore could go from D end into defensive tackle. And we, without having to go out and go into the portal and bring in a whole new team, just moving players around into some different positions, but it all started at that cornerback spot. If we couldn't get the corner right, if we can't cover and have the speed to do that, then it's all a moot point, the rest of it. But when we got those guys right, and Barron was so key at that, when Barron could do that and when those corners could go one-on-one like that, it just allowed us to all of a sudden get so much speed on the field just by moving guys into different spots. And it was fun too, watching some of those guys. Ed Stewart didn't like it at first. He's like, I don't like playing linebacker. I'm playing a bubble linebacker. I'm up on the line of scrimmage against a tackle. I don't want to do that. But he adjusted and he got developed year after year. And by the time he's done here, he's a top finalist for the Butkus Award. And that was great coaching. It was great development. It was great willingness by all those players to be willing to make those, to trust their coaches, to trust their teammates, to trust the process and get developed. When some of them, they've never played the position that they were now playing, but they made it work.
They made it work. That's for sure. And you're right. Having players that believe in putting the team first and at times making a personal sacrifice. And when you have a bunch of those guys, you really have something special. And that's what we had at that time, because that's exactly what it took. When you're navigating that type of transition, you need a lot of individuals that are putting the team first and trusting the process. And those group of guys did that, and the results speak for themselves.
Well, one of my colleagues at the foundation, Tony Veland, you mentioned Mike Minter. When Minter goes down with that season-ending injury, horrible, at the beginning of the 94 season, there's Tony Veland, who was backing up Tommy Frazier at quarterback, who probably had, probably was tempted. Should I go and transfer? Should I leave? I mean, that's what kids would be, looking at today. And he switches sides of the ball, goes to the defense, and becomes a 2-year starter for us, goes to the pros at that position. But that willingness, that team first mentality, recruiting locally. You mentioned Amon Green. My gosh, that was Omaha Central was a feeder school for us with I-backs there for 2 decades. And, when some things change in football, I'll buy that, but there's some things that don't as well. And it's always important that we get the best kids out of our state. And I think Coach Rule, that's been very important to him in his 3 years already here. We've already seen a focus on that. We're going to try to shut down the borders and make sure that we get the best of our kids in state here. And then the way we're Nebraska is always, when we're at our best, we're getting the best of those kids here, and then we're going down to Plano, Texas, and we're going out to LA, and we're going down to Bradenton, Florida, and we're getting some good kids from those areas too. And when you can meld all that together and you get the grit and the toughness and everything that comes with being a Husker, it's a pretty special formula that we have going.
Indeed it is. And you really see that taking shape in terms of this existing coaches staff strategy. You talked about their focus locally. And then, you look at what's going on, NIL, transfer portal, et cetera. That really accelerates a lot of the recruiting you do in other areas and your ability to attract top talent. So it's an exciting time. It's a different time in college football, but with change comes a lot of excitement.
I think you could run this show right now, Jerome. You just segued us perfect into question 4. And how do you think the Huskers will do this year? Well, this is where we're at right now. I think I was telling you about halfway through the show, 30 some minutes kind of for the first 3 questions. And I swear every time the last question, we're at least 30 minutes because it all leads up to where are we at right now? Where are we at in the development of the program with Coach Rule going into season 3? I think that there's a lot of we haven't had a lot of transition. I feel good about this coach being the right guy in the right spot, and yet I say that, and then I think, but we're replacing all 3 coordinators this offseason. There's this new 105 rule for the rosters, so it's forcing us to have to flip over a roster, faster than you typically would. In the world of the transfer portal and the NIL, teams are getting transitioned too, and so on one side, I'm like, well, we finally have reached a nice calm point. We've got a good coaching staff in place. Everything's good, and then I'm like, my God, there's change everywhere. This is kind of the college football of today's era, and I feel there's this piece of I just got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in that sense.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, for folks that have followed college football for a long period of time, it is different. Rosters turn over at a much faster pace, and there's pros and cons to that, right? When you think about a program like Nebraska, where the culture of our football team probably needed to change, needed to turn. Well, there's only so much of that you can do with the existing players. There's some of that attrition that you really needed to take place so you can bring in guys that have the growth mindset that you really want them to have within your program. And so I think back, and I don't know if I shared this with you, but it was an interesting occurrence. So this would have been a couple years back. Dylan Raiola was a senior in high school, and this particular weekend I was on the NBA advisory board for the University of Nebraska. So I came back to Lincoln, and we were playing Michigan, and I decided, I was like, you know what, I have the advisory board meeting on Friday. I'm not going to go to the game on Saturday. I'm just going to hang out at my dad's house, on Saturday, watch the game on television, and Michigan beat us pretty bad, right? And so that Sunday, I'm going to Eppley Airfield, and I get through security, and who's in front of me? It's Dom, it's Dayton, it's Dylan. And I recognize them. Of course, they don't know who I am. And Dylan was committed to Georgia at the time, but I can tell, like, the wheels, I think, were turning in his head, because for someone to have the look of anguish that he had on his face when Nebraska just got beat the way they did, I just wondered if he was second thinking his commitment to Georgia. And, kind of fast forward, he flips to Nebraska. He starts as a freshman year. I just think when you have a kid that wants to be at Nebraska, wants to win at a high level, we talked about some of the leadership characteristics with Tommy Frazier. I think heading into year 2 with Dylan as our quarterback, it kind of starts with him. And I think we have the right leader at the quarterback position. To your point, I think we have the right coaches, the right coordinators. Yes, we've had some turnover, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams, but I think we brought in some high caliber coaches. I think Coach Rule does a great job of making sure every coach he brings into the organization fits within the culture. And so I am really, really excited to see, how this is going to play out. Like when I look at the schedule, in some regards, it's a favorable schedule. You look at the first 3 non-conference games, gives us an opportunity to get a little bit of momentum going. And then I think, Cincinnati, Akron, Houston Christian. Cincinnati, of course, road game, but will play very much like a home game at Arrowhead. Akron, Houston Christian, then, big game against Michigan, but we all know that they're kind of in rebuild mode. So there's an opportunity for Nebraska to get some really, really good momentum going here. Michigan State, Maryland. I mean, all of these games, on the front end of the schedule, on paper, and I can't emphasize on paper enough, are winnable games. Will they win them? That's a different story. But they're winnable games. And so I think the ingredients are there for this team to take a major jump. I just think it's very difficult, given all of the variables that you outlined, to say, with confidence, how are we going to look against, USC or at UCLA? The toughest game on paper appears to be Penn State at Penn State, right? But that's deep into the season. So that gives you an opportunity to find your identity as a football team, offense, defense, et cetera, and go out to Penn State and see what happens. And so I think for me, this is the type of season where it's fun as a fan, where, in the past, you could look at a schedule and say, we're going to win 10 or 11 games, back in the heyday. Or more recently, I think everyone would say 6-6. I would tell you this is the year where the expectations are higher. 6-6 to me would be a disappointment this year. There's no question about that. But do I expect this team to go 10-2, 11-1? I can't say that I expect that. But would I be surprised if they do? No, I won't, because the ingredients are there. And you look back at the type of success Arizona State had this past year, in the way that they were able to flip from, I think they were 3-9 the year prior to being a college football playoff to, nearly making it to that championship game. And you just say, okay, they turn things around pretty quickly. Now, can they sustain it? That remains to be seen. But it just tells you that in this day and age of transfer portal, NIL, et cetera, you can find impact players and flip your roster and the quality of your team very quickly. And it's going to be fun to watch the season play out and see if we can make that jump.
We had Coach Osborne on a couple of years ago, and it was right as the portal and NIL were really starting to kick in. In fact, it was the offseason after Michigan State made a huge jump forward under Mel Tucker by transitioning the entire team via the portal. And Coach Osborne talked at that time about how teams you can see gigantic fluctuations in a team from one year to the next now, good or bad. Teams that hit the portal the right way and it works, teams could have a 5, 6, 7 win advantage from the year before. And if you lose a whole bunch of players to it, that can, you can have the same negative impact to your record as well. I think Coach Rule's done a nice job every season managing the roster in terms of we haven't had mass defections when other teams would, regardless of what, even to the point of like you said earlier, sometimes you need a little bit of roster movement, especially if you've had a lot of losing seasons the way we've had. Sometimes you want to get some players moved on. Some staffs have, we've chided, Coach Sanders a little bit at Colorado for doing that. But the reality is that he wanted to change his roster faster and bring in his players. You can do that more now. I think what Rule is doing and what I really like is that there's an element of old school development. Let's be a developmental program, while also you got to play in today's world too of the portal. And if you have some specific needs, then go out and get them. As Nebraska changed their coaching staff here, we bring in the wide receivers coach from Kentucky. We have 2 receivers from Kentucky, including their best receiver that have transferred here. That's going to have a direct impact immediately on the field for us. When you think about the coaching staff, it is different, but I would argue it's better now. To bring in Holgerson, a guy who's been a head coach down in Houston, down at West Virginia, and now he's your offensive coordinator, similar to what Chip Kelly was doing a year ago at Ohio State. To bring in Phil Snow, who's a longtime coach, and he's associate head coach with Coach Rule. Coach Rule himself has been head coach at the NFL and college level. Mike Eckler now comes back to Nebraska as special teams. We definitely expect a special teams improvement, but I think all of that's some real experience in the coaching staff room at a time when it's probably as challenging as it's ever been to be a coach. we asked Coach Osborne what his thoughts were on being a coach in today's world, and his response was, "I'm glad I don't have to be." Like, it's just that much more challenging today. And so, but I give a lot of credit to Coach Rule to being willing to make some of those changes. He had coaches on the staff that he's coached with a number of years, and some of them, he did make some moves with. But I think it's an area where he's evaluating, no different than how Coach Osborne would evaluate in 1990 and 91 and 92. We're not going to, Osborne wasn't going to go flip everything over and fire everything, but there still were changes that need to be made. We're still losing some games. How do we get over it? What do we need to do to get over that hump? And I would argue right now that's exactly what Coach Rule is. He's identifying to. Why are we losing to Iowa on a last-second field goal when we out-yarded them? If you looked at the box score, we won that game. Why are we losing to them? Well, that's when you start to talk about some of the special teams errors and gaffes that we've had. And then we bring in a guy like Mike Eckler. I think the world of Eckler. I went to coaching clinics, the high school coaches clinics, from the last year of Solich all the way to the second year of Frost, every season for about 16 years. And like during the Pelini era, like to watch Eckler practice as a coach, Jerome, the energy he brought to his room, and he coached Levante David, he coached Will Compton, but the energy he brought to the room, and I now think that he's going to be bringing that to the special teams. I instantly think that's going to be an area of strength for us next year.
I agree with you. You touched on something that's, in my opinion, really, really important, which is, Matt Rule's ability to self-scout his coaches, evaluate performance, and make very difficult decisions, right? Like you heard me mention leadership earlier, and I just think that's an element of leadership, right? Like someone that can recognize, yes, things aren't going as expected, and here is what we need to do to get things going in the right direction, having conviction about that and making changes. And so it's finding the right balance, right? To your earlier point, change is not always the answer, but status quo is not always the answer. It's finding the right balance and making sure you have the right people on the right platform, right? And that's what you have to do. And that's one of the things that, from day one, I always had a lot of confidence in Coach Rule to do that because, just given his background, I felt like, number one, he had the skill set to make that evaluation and have the confidence that, to follow his instincts. But then number two, it's okay, once you make that decision, do you have the visibility to find that right person to bring in to fill that particular position, right? Like everyone can bring somebody in, but are you bringing in that right somebody? And I just think having the connections he has, college football, professional football, gives him the opportunity to, talk to a lot of coaches and really make the best evaluation as to who fits what we need for that particular role. And so I just think we have great leaders at the helm right now, both at the coaching level and at the player level. And I think, I really do think, that combination is going to start to bear some fruit this season where we get things going and get it going in a major way.
Well, let's talk about something that is unique going on this offseason. There's the NCAA rule where teams are going to be going down to 105 players. That's going to be the roster limit. And it's an interesting discussion in a lot of ways, but in one, we can argue that we're taking away opportunities, right? I mean, teams had 140, 150 on their team before, all these walk-ons, and now we're going down to 105. But on the flip side, we used to have a scholarship limit of 85 for football. Now it's 105. There's 20 more scholarships available. It's just that's what your team is going to be. It's 105. And I think of having a coach who has come from the NFL and college, NFL where you have a 54-person roster, I think it is, and Coach Rule, it's basic math here, but he kind of broke it down. He's like, let's kind of look at like we have two teams right now. We kind of have our team of 52, 53 that's who's playing on any given week. No matter how big your roster is, you could have 200 guys on your roster. Pretty much these 52 guys, which is your two deep on offense and defense, your special teams, and a couple other players. About 52, 53 guys. Okay, so that's our playing team. And then we have about another 52 guys, which fills out the 105, and you're looking at developmental guys, younger players, guys that might be redshirting, guys that are a year or two away. And then he even said maybe the last 5 or 10 guys on the roster, they might be real good glue guys for the that you really want in the locker room, guys that Phil needs that way too. And I just, having him explain it like that, I thought made it so much sense, because while I'm disappointed to see some of the walk-ons go away, and I know Coach Rule is, having been a former walk-on himself at Penn State, I know he's disappointed in seeing that go away. He was as vocal as any coach was about not having the roster go down. He wanted it to be 110 or 115. I mean, every number mattered to him. But at the end of the day, I also think he's in a really good position to be able to manage with that coaching staff that we talked about that he's brought in, the experience that he's brought in. I think they're in good position to manage what that roster is going to look like as we have to get it down to that 105.
I think that's right. You know, the one question that I have is, I have no doubt in their ability to evaluate, manage the 105. The question that I have, and I think it's a unique situation for Nebraska, which is, when you think about the number of walk-on players we've had historically, and many of those players wound up becoming starters and, you know, all conference type players, right, in a few instances. But what you cannot argue against is the impact they had on the team culture. And so what I am curious about is, you know, how do you backfill that when your 105 is going to be comprised of, we just talked about transfer portal guys, NIL, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you make sure that culture within that team stays grounded in the right things? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that coaching staffs today has. And it's going to be interesting to see how that part of the equation plays out. But I have no doubt, you know, from a talent evaluation perspective, from a schematic perspective, I think we're, you know, going to be doing all of those things at a very, very high level. The only question that I have, you know, and it's not just for this year, it's going to play out in the years to come, is that culture, because I just think the contributions that many of those walk-ons had to the culture was undervalued, underappreciated by many.
Yeah, the culture that they brought, and then things get tough, and there's adversity, and I'm concerned. Just, this isn't about just Husker football. This is college sports in general. When it gets tough, if it's so easy that you can just leave and go somewhere else, I mean, that's not real life either. You know, in work, you know, when it gets tough, I mean, if you just call it quits every time and just, you know, up and leave and go somewhere else, I mean, you can only do that so many times before people are probably going to stop, you know, taking your calls and wanting to hire you again. You know, it just doesn't work like that. And so I think that's a challenge for coaches today too, is how can you still coach and coach hard? And when someone's not playing right, I think in basketball right now, we've seen a couple examples with Coach Hoiberg. They've done a good job as this season's gone on. There's been a couple of players they've had to bench, and then they've taken them back off the bench. And I always have watched, how is that player going to respond? Is it, you know, here's a guy that maybe just transferred in this year. You know, what's his buy-in to the university, to the state, you know, to the team? And I've been so impressed on the basketball side with how there have been some players that they've taken that hard coaching, and then they get their next chance when there's an injury or someone fouls out or whatever, and that guy gets on the court and he's playing well. I want to see that play out in the football world too. And I mean, I think we'll see examples of that. There's going to be times when Holgerson got hired right away in those last 3 games, like how key was that, getting him on the field, coaching the offense for those last 3 games. And he would bench a guy, or he certainly sat a guy. I mean, coach some guys hard. And that offense, we saw the best of it after he got in there and started making some of those changes and everything. And to me, that's a good sign, because there's still room, even in all the changes of college football today, there's still room for coaching and for changes and things that need to be made, old school moves. And I think this is a good staff to be able to do that.
It's interesting you say that. You know, one of the games I attended this past year was the Nebraska USC game. And while we came up a little bit short in that particular game, the offense felt different. Like you can tell that the play calling put players in better positions to make plays, and that with more time, with more continuity, with more, opportunity to work together, that there would be better days on the horizon. And so that's one reason why I am very optimistic about next year. Is now we're going to have an entire off season where Coach Holgerson can work with this offense, figure out what the players do well. Obviously, he's infused some new talent in certain positions, and get more explosives. I think that's the biggest thing we got to figure out on offense. Is this past year we didn't have very many explosive plays, meaning when we went to score touchdowns, those were 10, 11, 12, 13 play drives. That's difficult to sustain in college football. I don't care who you are. And so we got to figure out, okay, yes, we want to have that ability, but we also want the ability to have a 4 or 5 play touchdown drive where someone's, catching a 10 or 12 yard slant, taking it to the house, or, somebody gets, behind the safety at the wideout position, and you get that 50 or 60 yard, explosive type play, or, having that running back rip off that 30, 40, 50 yard play and takes it to the house. Like, I think that's the one element of our offense that was really missing, because we did a lot of things well down the stretch. But to me is, when you have to rely on 10, 11, 12 play drives to score touchdowns, there's just too many things that can go wrong consistently to prevent you from putting up the type of points you have to score in today's day and age of college football to win.
I think that's a great point, Jerome. And that for the live viewers right now, they're watching. We have this is the transfer portal, the official transfer portal for On 3, and I've highlighted 3 players here, wide receivers, part of the new coaching staff here. 2 of them from Kentucky, Hardly Gilmore, 6'1", 165 freshman, but Dane Key, he's the one. He's been at Kentucky for multiple years now, has had a lot of catches, a lot of yards. So this is a guy that's been developed there. Nizia Hunter as well, the transfer from Cal. These are some of those guys that, if you're talking about that infusion, that direct infusion of talent onto the field, that we need a couple big plays. That's the thing that hurt us as much last year as anything. And to your point, probably if there's a player I can think of that was a big time player for us, Ja'Cory Barney was one. And with him back, so this is that blend, that old school, new school. Like, we're going to get a transfer or 2 out of the portal, but we're also going to develop that kid that's been here. And again, think about where we're going to get some of this talent. We're going down to Florida for these guys we're bringing in transfers. There's Carter Nelson from 8-man football, Ainsworth, Nebraska, and what we're going to be asking out of him next year at the tight end position. There's big playability, but you've got to see it, because you cannot just rely on 15 play drives. To your point, there's too many opportunities for that penalty to hurt you. There's too much, there's a turnover opportunity. I always throw out the Big Ten refs are guaranteed to hose us on some play over 15 plays as well. So yeah, the big playability, you've got to be able to get some of that too. And I'm so interested to see what Dylan looks like in year 2. There's a development piece of Dylan that, as a freshman, I mean, he played like he played, and I thought that he did well at times. I thought that he struggled at times. But if there's one thing I thought that he really, from a development standpoint, his legs, if he can get his legs involved in the game, he doesn't have to be Tommy Frazier running it. He doesn't have to be even Patrick Mahomes running it. But we saw him a couple times towards the end of the season do this, extending plays, getting a first down by scrambling and running for 7 yards. If he can build that into his game, man, he becomes a really dangerous quarterback then. And he wants to emulate Patrick Mahomes anyways. That's the style he said he likes playing like that. That's what Mahomes has been able to do too, is when you can extend those plays, get out of the pocket, move around. That's what the NFL wants for quarterbacks right now too. So I think there's a development piece that is there for him to do that.
I think you're exactly right, but I think what's most encouraging about that is I think that's something that can very easily be developed. Like from my perspective, he showed that he has the ability to run when needed. I think from my perspective, it didn't feel natural. Like, he didn't have a natural feel when to run, when to stay in the pocket and throw it. And I think with, the off-season film, working with Dana, et cetera, if he can get that to just be, very instinctive, I think this offense goes to the next level. Because when you talk about what does he do well, I thought he read defenses pretty well as a freshman quarterback. Yes, we'll like to see, fewer turnovers, and I think that will come year 2. But some of the throws that he made, you cannot coach. And yeah, we'll talk about, some of the throws that he missed. I don't worry about those because I know those are all throws he can make. Like those are the types of things that with experience, I have a lot of confidence that he'll make year 2, year 3, etc. And so for me, it's just that it's, when it's 3rd and 5, if they have you locked down at, across the board and they're in man coverage and there's a hole in the middle, can you run and get that 5 yards and just keep the chains moving, right? And knowing, right, when to slide and when you have to go head first for ball placement purposes to keep the chains moving. Just knowing those types of things instinctively is going to be an important part of his development in year 2. But you named a lot of the players on offense that I'm interested in seeing. There's 2 others that I would also mention. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch Heinrich Harburg at tight end position full time next year. If you just think about his size and athleticism, he's just a big play waiting to happen. And Carter Nelson, I think, is going to be absolutely tremendous. But a lot of respect for Emmett Johnson. I think he's a tremendous running back. But I'm also excited to see, I think it's Jamarian Parker.
St. Louis.
St. Louis kid, right? And so I'm really excited to see what he brings to the table because, the Big Ten, it's like the old days at Nebraska. You need more than just one running back. We're going to need 2 or 3 to make it through this type of season in the Big Ten. And so finding some other backs to complement Emmett Johnson, I think is going to be important.
Yeah, because I think Emmett, he was a huge loss the second we saw him go into the portal, and he was a huge addition.
Yes.
And this goes back at times, too. It's not just about going to the portal to get your players. Retention of team is really important right now as well. I mean, we can't just lose everyone. And when I saw him go in, I was like, no. We do not want to lose Emmett. Emmett's getting developed. That's one part of it. He is definitely developed, but he has that potential to change a game. He can make a guy miss. He can do all those things, but he's also one player, right. And the Big Ten's really rugged, and we need more than one guy. And I think Parker's a great addition to that. Harburg is really intriguing to me. I love everything about the kid from how he has stuck it out. Again, it'd be easy to go and transfer when you haven't had a chance to play and all those things. And he didn't do that. And his athleticism is just sneaky good. Like I was at the Illinois basketball game a couple weeks ago, and they did the slam dunk contest at halftime of the football players, and Harburg won it. And he's just a very good athlete at a big body, 6'5". He was a big quarterback. Now he's going to be a decent sized tight end. And I think it was Tyler Warren at Penn State. Anybody that watched him, he was a former quarterback, and then they moved him to tight end. He's going to be drafted here, I'm sure, first round. He was an All-American for him. I think he won the tight end award, is that the Mackey Award? But the way they used him, he would line up every once in a while at a wildcat, and then he would, they found ways to move him all around the formations, stand him up, get him down with the, hand in the turf, all those different things. I'd love to see how creative Holgorsen can get with an athlete like Harburg. I mean, it'll be really, and Carter Nelson too. Those 2 guys at the tight end spot. Wow, there could be some mismatches, and then you throw in these new receivers that we've had, and Barney. I don't know that I'd ever take him off the field. I just love the kid out there. And looking at other, I'm bringing back up the portal here. We also had a little bit of movement on the offensive line. Rocco Spindler, who we just brought on a couple of weeks ago from Notre Dame, played in the national championship game for them. So he's on the O-line, 6'5", 315. And then we also brought in Elijah Pridgett, 6'6", 305, a tackle from Alabama, and was a starting right tackle for them. Could be a left tackle at Nebraska next year. I mean, I think they're bringing in depth. They're bringing in opportunities for guys to compete on the line. And let's see, we're not quite ready to say who's going to play what position, but you're bringing in some talented depth then to go along with guys that are coming back, Lutovsky and Evans Jenkins. And, so we've got some players now. And then, the kid from Lincoln Southwest that played left tackle all last season, and Gatula, that got called into action once Corcoran got hurt. So there's some depth on the O-line. There's going to be some competition there, but ultimately at the end of the day, if we're going to win a lot of games in football, you got to play well in the trenches and on the O-line. And those are some of the guys that are going to be competing for it.
No, lots of options there, but I think, as exciting as all of those players are on offense that we just discussed, there's a lot of new faces on the defensive side of the ball as well. And I think we're going to have, hopefully an opportunity to get after the passer with 4 players. I think hopefully we'll have an opportunity to play, tighter coverage on the outside, which will allow us to do some things differently on the back end. So I'm really, really excited to see what this defense looks like as well, because there's some key pieces we got at edge and at cornerback that can really make a difference next year.
Yeah, I'm looking at Williams Winery right here. He was a 5-star recruit a year ago, and this one intrigues me. He's from Missouri, goes to Missouri, basically redshirts for them, which seemed odd anyway. Like I don't know. I think there could be a future in football where they just give 5-year clocks and they don't do redshirting anymore, because it's weird that they redshirted him. Basically, they kind of developed him for 1 year, and now he's transferred out, and he was a top transfer in the portal, and we've got him 6'6", 265. He's going to be one of those edge guys that you're talking about. Marquise Watson Trent was at Georgia Southern when Georgia Southern came to Nebraska and beat us. He was starting at linebacker there. He's going into his senior year. He has 4 years of stats and development under him at the linebacker spot. And and then somewhere here we also had the Oklahoma linebacker. I think it was like McCullen or shoot. But anyways, to your point, they have flipped the defensive roster as much as anything, and infusing that with as much talent here as you can get. And we got to get after the quarterback. That's important there, and that's what I think that they're trying to do here.
Indeed, it's going to be exciting times.
Yeah, why can't I find? Yeah, Deshaun McCullough. There we go. From Oklahoma to Nebraska. There. Could be edge, linebacker, great talent. Actually started as at Indiana because he's from Bloomington originally. Started in Indiana, went to Oklahoma for a couple of years, and now here between McCullough and then Winery. I mean, those are 2 big-time talented defensive players, transfers that are going to infuse a lot of talent into that front 7. That's the thing. I talked about the 4-3 back in the day, how it started at the cornerback spot, and then we moved guys around. When we switched a couple of years ago from the 4-3 to the 3-3-5, to me, it all started really at that nose tackle spot. Then, if you're going to make that work, you've got to be able to have somebody in the middle that can just man that spot, and that's what we've had the last couple of years now with Nash. Somebody that can consistently do that, and you have to be able to be tough up front with 3 guys, maybe a 4th. If you want to be able to play that 3-3-5 system. We've been really successful on defense the last 2 years. Tony White did a great job transitioning us to that style. John Butler now has been here for a year. The new defensive coordinator, he was brought in. He was at Buffalo the year prior, Buffalo Bills, and was brought in late last year in the offseason, but was here for the whole offseason. So he's kind of been indoctrinated now into the defense and into the language and everything. Worked under Tony White there, so I'll be interested to see what he does with defense. And to your point there with Holgerson, it'll be fun to see what he can do now that he really has an off season. Like, I mean, think about that. What can you do in an off? What do you do in an off season? What is that staff doing right now in January and February? What are they doing with that offense on a day-to-day basis in the meeting rooms? I'd love to be a fly on the wall.
You and I both. I mean, this is the time where you're evaluating what your team does well, what plays fit their abilities and tinker around a little bit. So it's going to be fun to see. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like we'll have a spring game to take a quick peek. We're going to have to wait until next fall, but it should be very exciting once they roll this out late August.
Yep. I did read something Coach Rule, I think, gave some update here in the past day or two on maybe what the spring game could look like or what spring weekend could look like. We'll know more Redcasters as the offseason goes on, but they'll do something, no doubt. Kind of think of like Pro Bowl, how they've done more skill competitions. We want to have an opportunity to bring Nebraska fans to Lincoln over the spring. There's other, obviously, baseball and softball events going on as well. So it's always a great chance to get a lot of people back to Lincoln, and I'm sure they'll do something along those lines here as well. But do you have before we get to the parting shots part here, Jerome, do you have a prediction, whether it's a record or just what you think, what you're expecting to see? What's your kind of prediction for next year?
If I talked about a lot of the variables that are in play for next year, if I had to pull a number out, and I hate doing this, but I would go at 9-3. I'd go at 9-3. So significant, improvement over the 6-6 we, I guess it was, 6-6 regular season we ended with. Significant improvement there from a wins perspective, and I think more than anything, I hope that we find that opportunity to beat a team that we weren't expected to win. Like, we've had a lot of close calls in that regard in years past, but finding a way to actually win some of those games will be huge and would really set the stage for a big year in 2026. So I'm looking for something in the neighborhood of 9-3 in 2025.
I love it. Well, we've gone through a lot here. This is the parting shots segment here now, Jerome. And one of the things I want to ask you about, we haven't really talked about this, but you mentioned going to the USC game. You have a cool tradition here. And so a friend of yours, Karan Johnson, is that it?
Karan Johnson, that's it.
Karan Johnson, friend of yours from Omaha. You and him have been going to Husker football home games and away games for how long now? And how long has that tradition been going on for you?
25 years. So he and I have been friends since middle school. We both went to the University of Nebraska, and upon graduating from Nebraska, my immediate job was in Omaha. His first job was in Rochester, New York. And so one of the things that we decided we were going to do to just make sure our friendship continued over the years was we're just going to have a guys' weekend trip. And we focused that trip around a Nebraska football game. And it started off early years as one game, but as we got deeper into our careers, became 2-3 games, and really looking forward to, when things get rolling, increasing that number as much as we can. So it's been a lot of fun over the last 25 years, but if you really think back, those have been down years. And so, like, he and I have seen a lot of tough losses over those years, and just looking forward to the future when this thing turns, and being there to support the team both home and away on a much larger level as things turn around.
Well, Jerome, I've had so much fun getting to know you. I've had so much fun with this show with you too. Part of what I enjoy so much about Husker football is that it's a great unifier to me. That's what it's meant to be. And I know sometimes doing the podcast, or we play a little bit too much into the social media world, and that's its own thing, right? But the away games, that's something that my friends and we've been doing for years as well. And there's nothing better than going to an away football game as a Husker fan, and you find somebody wearing that same red shirt or jacket or whatever it is, and I mean, just instantly you're best friends. It doesn't matter. You think of all the things in this world that are supposed to divide us, right? And you go to a football game and you see somebody wearing that red, and it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter politically. None of those things matter. You're Husker fans, and you start talking, and you become friends. And I'm telling you, you and I, we sat down for 5 minutes, and we were talking Huskers, and it was like I've known you for years. So I've really enjoyed getting to know you that way, and I hope Redcasters and fan formers, I hope you've had a chance to enjoy this and get to know Jerome as well. That's what the fan forum is about. I want to bring on people that are Husker fans, whether they're former players or whatever it is. I want to talk to people that are passionate about Nebraska the way that I am, the way that Jerome is, and it's been a lot of fun to get to know you there. As is tradition on the fan forum, Jerome, my guest, always gets the final take. So the floor is yours.
Matt, thank you very much for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate your enthusiasm for Nebraska football. I always enjoy talking Nebraska football with you, and appreciate the opportunity to be on the forum tonight. And more than anything, just really looking forward to the 2025 football season, and looking for another year of supporting Big Red.
Go Big Red. Well,
Go Big Red.
Until next time, fan formers, just remember, next time you could be the next fan to join us on the forum.
A Herd at Sports Network production.